My name's Lee Rainey. I'm president of the Friends of the East Broad Top and author of The History of the East Broad Top, co-authored with Frank Kuiper. The East Broad Top is a narrow gauge railroad. That means its tracks are only 3 feet apart, unlike most railroads nowadays, which are 4 feet 8.5 inches. Narrow gauge railroads were very popular in Pennsylvania in the 1870s and 80s when the East Broad Top was built, but most of them didn't survive into the 20th century. The East Broad Top today is the oldest narrow gauge railroad still in existence in the United States, and when it shut down in 1956 from its freight operations, it was one of only 3 narrow gauge railroads still existing in the United States, the only one east of the Rocky Mountains. And that's one of the things that makes it so special from a historical standpoint. Unlike a museum where things are assembled from many different places, everything here has always been here. It was built here, it was built for the railroad, and has been here all of its life. And that makes this an attraction that draws people literally from all over the world. I've given tours here for folks from Europe, from Asia, that have come from far away to see this very famous example of a narrow gauge railroad. The opportunity exists for this once again to be a major tourism draw here in Huntington County when it returns to operation in the future. The East Broad Top Railroad opened from Mount Union to Orbezonia in 1873. It was built by capitalists who owned coal lands on the Broad Top Mountain coal field and who wanted to bring coal to new iron furnaces that were built at Orbezonia. The railroad was extended down to the coal lands in 1874, reaching Robertsdale, a new company town. And the iron furnaces began operation in 1876. The railroad flourished in the iron industry for a couple decades, and then the center of that industry began to move further west to places like Pittsburgh and Chicago. So the iron industry tapered off. The last furnace closed in 1908, but the railroad found a new life serving the very large brick plants that developed in Mount Union. Mount Union had 3 very substantial brick plants. One of them was the largest of its kind anywhere in the world, and they used both coal and stone that were carried on the East Broad Top. The East Broad Top had its heyday as a freight carrier in the 1920s, and then business began to taper off after that. And finally, the demand for coal went away and the railroad closed. When the East Broad Top ended freight operations in 1956, the railroad was purchased by the Kowalczyk Salvage Company from Indiana, Pennsylvania. And it was idle for 4 years. In 1960, reopened as part of the celebration of the bicentennial of Orbezonia Borough. It continued to operate as a tourist carrier for many years after that, becoming one of the premier tourist railroads anywhere in the country, under the stewardship of the Kowalczyk family. And they were able to make a number of repairs and put a number of the historic locomotives and cars back into service over about 3 miles of the main line. In 2004, Mr. Joe Kowalczyk, the current owner of the railroad, told us that his family would no longer be able to care for the railroad indefinitely. And a search began for a long-term future for the railroad in some sort of nonprofit organization. The railroad was leased and operated for a number of years by the nonprofit East Broad Top Preservation Association, which is seeking to raise money to put the railroad back in operation. It turned out in the year 2012 that there was a trade-off that had to be made between spending time on raising money and spending money on keeping the railroad operating. And unfortunately, the railroad had to close down that year, but it's confidently expected that it'll reopen under the East Broad Top Preservation Association ownership sometime in the not-too-distant future. In the meantime, the Friends of the East Broad Top works closely with both the Kowalczyk family and with the Preservation Association to carry out a whole series of maintenance tasks to help preserve the historic buildings and to get rolling stock like the number 14 combine back into service for operation when the railroad reopens.
I'm Andy Van Slyck with the Friends of the East Broad Top, currently Vice President, and working on restoring Combine 14, which is a 45-foot long passenger car originally built about 1880 for commuter service in the Boston, Massachusetts area. and it was believed to have a service life of about 35 years when it was built. And here we are 135 years later, giving it some TLC that it desperately needs. From this perspective, you can't see a lot of the car, but you can see we've replaced a lot of the wood, a good bit of woodwork, done a lot of iron work, some new foundry work, replaced a lot of the roof, and then we still have a lot of window work and a lot of the interior to replace on the car to bring it back to a usable car that'll hopefully run again someday.
The building here is the blacksmith shop at the East Broad Top. This building was built in 1904. It's part of the National Historic Landmark and was actually listed in the Historic American Engineering Record as a great example of early industrial technology. And a few years ago it was about to fall over. It had tipped so badly that actually this windowsill level was down at the ground. It was tipping very dramatically. And through a partnership between the East Broad Top Preservation Association, the Kowalczyk family that owns the property here in Rock Hill, and the Friends of the East Broad Top, we were able to put together a plan to put the building upright. In another year or so, this building will be back to its appearance when it was built in 1904. That's a good example of the type of work that goes on now at the East Broad Top in terms of preserving this remarkable opportunity and making it possible for it to have a life in the future, again, as an operating tourist railroad and museum.
Larry Salone, I'm the president of the East Broad Top Preservation Association, which is a nonprofit trying to purchase not only this part of the railroad, but the remainder of the railroad in its entirety, including rolling stock and buildings, and preserve it and resume tourist operations. The East Broad Top has been transitioning since about 2009. In 2009, the East Broad Top Preservation Association decided it was time to try to purchase the railroad from the Kowalczyk family and improve it and make it a self-sustainable historical event. The way we thought that would work is actually twofold. We started out by operating the railroad, the tourist railroad down in Orbisonia for the years 2009, 2010, and 2011. And that was really a learning attempt. It was to see if the railroad could sustain itself purely on a tourist railroad. We found out that it can't, because there is a lot of cost in the infrastructure of the steam locomotives, the passenger cars, the track, the buildings. Joe Kowalczyk ran it for years, and I'll promise you he didn't make money on it. He's put a lot of money out of his own pocket to make those trains run. The repair costs, the safety of the tracks and the passenger cars, you can't just run it based on what you make. The last year we ran it in 2011, we ran Polar Express, we ran Thomas, and we had a very good year. We had dinner trains. We made a little bit of a profit, but we could not have even repaired one of the steam locomotives for what we made in profit. So in order for that to be successful, you need to have these hopper cars and tank cars here, because they make money that'll help pay for what it takes to keep that place operational and safe. So we needed to come up with a plan and develop a bigger plan for that before we could purchase it. The immediate thing I thought of was Mount Union. Mount Union, if you look down the track this way, you can see where the East Broad Top interchanges, which used to be the Pennsylvania Railroad and is now the Norfolk Southern Railroad. So we didn't understand why we couldn't operate freight service here and begin doing an economic development program in Mount Union with the railroad to help pay for the costs that are affiliated with the tourist and the historical part of the railroad. We were fortunate enough to get a transportation grant to start the work. You can see the track. We rehabilitated the main line from the switch all the way through town to the bypass, which is what the grant was for. You can see Conrail hopper cars, tank cars are parked here now that are coming in for inspections and to be sent back out for whatever new purpose they're doing. It's been a tremendous success so far. Now that the track was completed at the end of 2014, we're pursuing economic development with customers. We have some potential companies that want to move into town that are talking about the land the EBT has to put some railroad-related businesses in. And we're really, really pleased with how far it's come so far. 2015 will be a key year to try to develop the business now. We're not stopping, by the way, at the bypass. We have purchased from Joe Kowalczyk all of the Mount Union tract from the switch through town, all the land, all the way and including the Ogwick Bridge out in Ogwick Mills. So we have 4 miles of main line. We have about 5 miles of sidings in the yard there that you guys are all familiar with. And we are now going back to transportation to say, okay, using HCBI, the business park out there, the railroad runs right through it. So we're going to update the line from the bypass through the business park and put a new switch into the business park and put in a transload station, which can load trucks. It'll have a pit, it'll have an elevator. We can load any kind of freight car out there. And that way stuff can come in by semi, by whatever way it comes in, and we can transload from the trucks onto trains and send stuff out. We think that's going to be a big step, and I think HCBI feels even more so because they've had some inquiries about business moving in there as soon as we get the railroad in the park and a switch, which will create even more jobs. So we're hoping this next year, the couple of years, is going to create jobs in this area. Will it translate to the tourism railroad? We hope so. We're forming a new board of directors for the tourist railroad attempt. We're talking to the Rails to Trails people who are very interested in using it all as a Rails to Trail project also. We think we're almost there. It's not going as fast as I would like it or as Mr. Kowalczyk would like it, but to me it's more important to do it right and be sustainable. And you need this part of it to make that part sustainable. The East Broad Top has a history in this area that is more extensive than I can ever explain. I was a fan of this railroad when I was 4 years old, and my parents brought me down to Orbisonia to ride it. So I've always loved the railroad, but it means much more to the area. To bring railroad service back in helps stimulate an economy here that hasn't been here for years, as far as I know. And so we're looking forward to the creation of jobs and such. Probably in Mount Union, we'll develop businesses that are rail related, because there's a limited amount of area on the Shirley, or I guess it's old Route 522, where the railroad yard is from EBT. There'll be railroad businesses, and I anticipate 250 to 300 jobs created over the next 3, 4, or 5 years, just in those industrial businesses. I think that as soon, if we're fortunate enough to get the funding that we asked for the business park, I think you'll see the business park develop quicker and faster, because it's really simple to run a railroad spur to businesses. This car right here can hold the same amount of stuff as 5.5 semis. It's going to reduce the cost for all the businesses out there and help the businesses around here compete, especially in worldwide economies. We're doing some things in town. We want to be good neighbors here. We try to support the local charities as much as we can. If you look down the track through town on Pennsylvania Avenue, there's 3 blocks that have been used for parking. They've been used for litter dumps. They've been a mess. And we're in the process, starting probably in about 2 to 3 more weeks. We'll level it all out. We'll lay a walking path, a linear park through town, lay grass and sod to get it fixed up. And so we don't want just to be here as a business. We want to be a good partner for the community. The tourist railroad and the history of this is essential not only to the state of Pennsylvania but to the United States, because it is the first narrow gauge in the United States. The historical context of EBT is tremendous, and so it needs to be preserved. It needs to operate, though. It shouldn't just be static. It should be moving, making noises, and where everybody can enjoy it. But this area is unbelievable for the railroad history it contains. I can see the trains starting in Mount Union out there behind McDonald's, and that area will be the station, for lack of a better word, and take people to Orbisonia to tour the shop complex and then bring them back to Mount Union. I know that Orbisonia is closer to the turnpike, and that's good for people coming from Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, but the people up north come down this highway. And so I think Mount Union will be the key. The mountain line, they call it, is where you go from Orbisonia up to Robertsdale. I would much rather work with the Rails to Trails people and establish that as a rail trail at this time, because all that track would have to come out anyways to be relayed, because it's not safe right now. So there's no harm in taking it out now, making it it's wide enough to put a track and a rail trail, so we can establish the rail trail with bicycle paths, Maybe four-wheelers, maybe, I don't know about dirt bikes, but I think four-wheelers are on them. I just think it would be tremendous. I would also like to take Robertsdale, where you're up on top of the mountain and you're kind of flat. I think that'd be a great place for speeder rides. But they're the little cars that are self-propelled with a gasoline engine and you buzz around in them. I think the Robertsdale area, we could put in probably 5 or 6 miles of little speeder stuff there on the main line and the Y. There's clubs all over the country.
Now this is for the kiddies who like to ride the train, whether in California or even up in Maine. Makes no difference if you're 2 or 102. Riding the horse and the buggy's not like the old shoe.